Hi, and welcome to Journey Forward with Jory Rose, where you will gain insights, tools, and inspiration to get unstuck and live your best life. Jory is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a passion for helping people cultivate awareness and authenticity so they can show up fully in all aspects of their life. And now, here's Jory.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Journey Forward with Jory Rose. I know this is going to be an awesome conversation because I am so excited to finally have on Sara Dean with us today. Sara, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. And if it's evidenced by the fabulous chit chat we've had for the past 20 minutes, I know that our listeners are going to really enjoy everything that we're going to be sharing in this episode today. So thanks so much.
Yes,
and please,
thank you for having me.
You are so welcome. Please introduce yourself and tell us about your journey and how you got to where you are today. I know it's a big question, but we all have that journey. And what is yours? What are you happy to share with us?
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, I'll try to give the abbreviated version because we can talk, as we've already proven.
I know we're besties. We're talking for hours, but now we've got to get to work.
Okay. So I'm the host of the Shameless Mom Academy podcast, and I've had the podcast for about 6 years. And there's a beautiful overlap between the podcast and the business that is a part of that. And then how my personal life overlaps with that, because the podcast was born out of my personal life as a mom.
I have to say, I love that. First of all, that to me feels like such a place of alignment.
Yeah.
Right? When our business life is born out of our personal life and you get to really live from that authenticity and be able to teach from that truth and share your personal wisdom and help others. I'm excited to hear about how it all unfolded. And because I know you've podcasting for 6 years is a little bit longer than many people have even been in the business of podcasting.
Yeah. It's definitely old age for podcasting. I'm a senior citizen podcaster, for sure. But it's interesting because that overlap between personal and professional has always been, or it's been present for me for the last 18 plus years.
Oh, wow.
Previous to the podcast, I was in the fitness industry, and that really came from, excuse me.
No worries.
Previous to the podcast, I was in the fitness industry, and that came from a personal passion and journey as well. And so, kind of backing way up into my childhood, I grew up not athletic, never played sports, was very insecure about my athletic ability, to the point that I didn't even want to go bowling in front of other people, because that was I might embarrass myself because I'm not athletic, which is a little bit funny and also very sad. So
there's not a lot of athleticism in bowling, and I totally understand
which speaks to the level of insecurity.
Yes. But it's about showing up. It's about being vulnerable.
Right. It's
not about the bowling.
It's about what if I'm bad at this and other people see that I'm bad at it. And so that was really how I felt around athleticism and around sports. And I ended up my senior year of high school starting to run a tiny, tiny bit. And during the course of teaching myself how to run, the very end of high school into college, a bunch of stuff shifted in terms of how I saw my body and what I felt my body was capable of. And my body changed a lot. And I realized that I actually had a lot of muscles and I was actually pretty athletic. And so that, as I got into my first career in sociology and psychology, I continued to really be personally interested just in fitness and pushing myself and learning new things. And so as I got really burnt out working in a psychiatric hospital after a handful of years. Yeah.
That would burn anybody out. Wow.
Yeah. I was working with kids in a psychiatric hospital. And when I started getting burnt out, I decided to go back to school to become a personal trainer. And so at that point, I was doing a ton of triathlons and distance running. And I just wanted to train people who were like me, who had never been athletic growing up, but were trying new things and getting a feel for what is it like to be in a strong body? And what is it like to feel athletic and accomplish a physical goal. And that was so, so fun and exciting. And so I did that for many years and ultimately ended up opening my own gym and really built a fitness business in a fitness community that I was really proud of. And
wow.
then after my
That's
son
quite an amazing accomplishment. Let me just interject there.
Thank
Going
you.
from I don't have, or what I perceive to not have as athletic abilities, to figuring out I really can put my mind and body, what my mind attends to, and believe in myself, to then like actually opening a gym.
Yes. So this is like the opposite of like, I'm not going to try something because I might not be good at it.
Yes.
So like, and now if I'm going to try this thing, I'm going to do the very best and go all the way with it.
Yes, I'm going to knock it out of the park. And
I'm going to be the very best person who was never athletic and then became athletic. So I had the gym for a number of years, and then I had my son, and after he was born, I realized I had a huge shift in my identity, I think as all women do after they have children. But what was really eye-opening during that time was that I had built this business that I thought was amazing. And it was in many, many ways. And I'm still super proud of it. But it wasn't aligned with what my values were at a certain point in motherhood, because I realized that the business I built was all about helping women shrink their bodies. And I was very much reinforcing this societal ideal that you are more valuable and more important if you're smaller. And so at a certain point, I started trying to shift my messaging and my marketing, and it wasn't really landing because I had this reputation for running all these transformation programs. I'm saying in air quotes, because they were really weight loss programs. So then I was like, well, we're going to do the transformation programs, but we're not going to do like weight check-ins, and we're not going to do measurements. And I was taking all these things out, and people still wanted them. And I was like, I'm just in the wrong industry. I have outgrown this. And really what I wanted to be doing was helping women take up space. And so I started the podcast while I still had the gym. And the podcast was like the antidote to helping women shrink their bodies.
Yeah.
Like, how am I going to help women take up space? Like all the space, be really loud, take up the whole entire room.
Which is so culturally and sociologically everything against women are socialized to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I ended up starting the podcast just as a passion project, just kind of as a, like, let's see how this feels kind of a thing. I very much knew I was ready for a different stage and a bigger stage. And I didn't quite know what that looked like, but I remember like being in my gym and having this feeling of, if you can create this transformation in this space, like you have for all these years, you can definitely do this with much greater reach and much greater impact if you like take a chance. And then it went back to like, okay, there's this thing that I've never done, and that seems really scary. And what if I'm bad at it? And if I'm going to do it, I'm going to figure out how to do it really, really, really well.
Yeah.
So here we are 6 years later, and I've had the show for 6 years. I ended up selling the gym a couple of years into the podcast, and then building a business completely around the show after I was out of the gym. And it's been really, really, really awesome.
Amazing. And gosh, I was taking some notes as you were talking. Okay, I want to make sure to ask about that, because I think right off the bat, I thought, how did you come up with the name for the show, the Shameless Mom Academy? Like, what was it that drew you to as a title, as a theme, as a place where it felt like this is going to attract the women I'm wanting to work with or reach or connect with or identify with?
Yeah.
How did you get to that?
Really good question. And there's a great story behind it. So the show actually started out as the Selfish Mom Academy.
Okay.
And I was really excited about that name. And I actually got a little bit of pushback as I told people about it. They were like, I don't know, like it's a little too polarizing. And there's going to be people who like won't listen because they're not going to like that vibe. And I was kind of like, I want it to be polarizing.
Right.
So I launched it as the Selfish Mom Academy, and it went really well. I mean, I had a great launch week. I like got on into some categories of new and noteworthy on Apple Podcasts, which was a really big deal at the time. And like, it was going gangbusters. And within a handful of days, I had to go to LA for a meeting, and I was about to get on the plane, and I opened my email, and I had a letter from a woman who was threatening to sue me because Selfish Mom was already trademarked. And this was right as the plane door was about to close. And so they're like, please turn off. It was like, put your phones in airplane mode. And I sat on that flight to LA, like trying not to throw up. Yeah. And I was horrified and embarrassed and angry. And like, I mean, I was having my own shame spiral. Like, how could I not know this? Like, And I had actually seen this woman's stuff. I had and looked into it a little bit, but I had incorrectly assumed that she was no longer using any of it because it looked like it wasn't a current situation. So we had to get lawyers involved, and it was a really expensive lesson. And I had to change the name within days, so I wouldn't get sued. And so I literally got on thesaurus.com and started looking up like synonyms for selfish that start with an S.
Yeah.
And it was really like sitting in a hotel room with my husband on the phone and crying and so mad and overwhelmed trying to figure this out. And I came up with shameless, and I was like, it was late at night, the night that this all happened. And I was like, okay, let me just sleep on it and think about it. And then by the next morning I was like, oh my gosh, it's so much better. It's so much more dynamic. I can do so much more with this. And at the time I had no idea where this was going to go.
Right.
But I just like could see this trajectory. Whereas before, like the Selfish Mom Academy was a place for me to like kind of sit and have fun anecdotally and like tell stories and whatever. And then like Shameless, I was like, I can do a whole bunch with this. And I started to see a lot of potential and possibilities. So while I felt really frustrated that woman handled that situation the way she did, and I felt really offended.
Probably a little bit attacked. And
I was just like, I would never talk to another woman the way she talked to me. But anyway,
it's always a good reminder of who you don't want to be.
Oh my gosh, totally. In fact, I was like, I hope I meet her someday at a conference. I was like, someday she'll be at a podcasting conference. I've never seen her at one. And she didn't have a podcast with that name. She had a podcast that was totally different. But anyway, so we've never met, but it was like this great gift that ended up happening. And that's how it got named. And then since then, there's just been so much opportunity for me to grow the community and to grow the conversations that we have around that theme. And so
So was the original thought with the selfish mom, meaning kind of ironically that moms are not selfish because they don't take time for themselves.
Yes. So it was like an invitation to be selfish.
Right.
But yeah, so that was the original spin on it. And that
which is why I think Shameless is so great, because there's so much shame that moms have around taking that time for themselves.
Right. And there's shame. I mean, we have shame around women have shame. Yes. Moms have shame around everything. Women have shame. So when we look at like the layers of shame, it's like, okay, well, if you're a woman, if you're a mom, if you're like, and then add in, if you are like a person of color or a person with a disability or a person like, so there's like layers and layers and layers of, So yes. So there's lots to work with.
It's endless, really. Yeah. I mean, as a therapist, I work, the majority of my client load are women. And I would say shame and lack of self-worthiness and fear and anxiety overtaking up space, even in their own family, right? Even in their own home, to really voice an opinion or have a stance or take time for themselves without guilt or feeling unworthy to do so. It's really deeply ingrained.
Yeah, it is. And it's interesting. I think I went into this with an attitude of like, I don't really carry shame. And I've gotten over that, and I've done my work around that. And then Sister Brene, when I was listening to her on her podcast, I think it was maybe it was one of her audiobooks. I was listening to her. She was in my ear a couple of years ago. And she said something about how we all carry shame. And I was like, no, we don't. I'm like, some of us used to.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh my God, she's right. And then I got started in therapy in this last year and like talked through things where I was like, I really thought that like I had overcome that. Like that is a box you can check, like done with shame. Yeah. And it's really not. And it's so like, you might not have shame. I might not have shame around things that many women have shame around. But that doesn't mean I don't have shame around other things.
Well, and the thing is with healing, it's never a one and done. So maybe you did check the box on areas of shame. And now, just like how you said, my values changed when I became a mom and my identity changed, right? So as we go through these different iterations of development through our life stages, it's going to re-trigger a potentially old narrative or an old trauma or an old, trigger in which we are like, wait, where does that come from? I thought I dealt with that, but I'm new now. And so, of course, I might have a new response to that.
Right. And even as like relationships evolve and your sense of self evolves, like,
yes,
definitely. I mean, and just how you manage yourself on a day-to-day basis. Like if you make a mistake, I can still be sent into a shame spiral, which I really thought I couldn't. And I really was like, everyone, like I really prided myself on taking imperfect action and blah, blah, blah. And then like some things happened over the last couple of years. And I was like, oh, like, yeah, I can take imperfect action, but there's some mistakes that are still going to send me into a shame spiral. Some of it I can be like, oh, that's imperfect action. It doesn't matter if I mess that up. And then there's other things where I'm like, oh shoot, like that mess up came at a cost to someone else, or, a cost to a relationship or whatever, where I'm like, oh, I wish that didn't go that way. I wish I didn't show up that way.
Right.
Even though I love to think that I make good decisions in the moment.
Well, and I would say most of the time you probably do, and we still get stuck. Right.
Totally.
And it's really interesting. Just today, I was talking with a client, and I've had this very exact same conversation with multiple clients around being a mom and feeling that shame and having that sense of martyrdom that a lot of moms experience. And, we talk about, well, what is your narrative around what does it mean to be a good mom? Like we all have that ability to like fill in the blank. To be a good mom means I, cook a meal every night, or I do my kids' laundry, or I'm always driving my kids everywhere. Like we all have this definition. I mean, those are just some very simple examples. And a lot of it goes a lot deeper of expression of emotion or wanting to protect our kids from their own pain and whatever it is. And so the conversation I often have is, well, okay, well, where did we get this role modeled? Obviously from our mothers. Well, generationally, like we couldn't be more different than our parents' generation.
Yeah.
And yet we're using that as a baseline for how we're supposed to show up. And at a time period where emotions weren't talked about, and now they are, and in which acceptance wasn't identified as a thing we can be working on, or even self-growth.
Right.
So it's so interesting how we hold this comparison to something that bears no comparison in today's time. And yet it's deeply ingrained.
Right. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And the comparison, it's not an apples to apples thing. It's that women have just added more and more and more to their plate to be more like men, instead of the apples and oranges being like men and women. Now like we're trying to be apples by just adding like more stuff to our plate so we can be more like them.
It's a hard thing for moms. It really, really is. One of the other things that I made note of, one of the first things you said was how your identity changed after you had your son. And I love that you named that, because I'm not sure many women truly honor and allow and give space for that identity to actually create change in their life, not just in their identity. So what shifted for you?
Yeah. So I think there's probably a lot, or I don't know if it's a lot, but there's probably multiple things that could trigger this in a person's life. For me, it was definitely more triggered by motherhood than anything else, but it could be triggered by like having to caretake a parent. It could be triggered by moving in with a partner. When my vision of mothering was that I would have a baby and I would put the baby in an ergo baby carrier, and he would or she would sleep on me all day while I just lived the life I had previously been living. And it would be really magical and peaceful. And he or she might wake up a couple times a day, and I would feed the baby, and then the baby would go back to sleep. And like the baby would take up like 10% of my life, and everything else would be the same. And that baby would take like 1% from the other 9 things in my life, but like it would pretty much be the same. And so after my son was born, it was nothing like that. It wasn't like he took a little bit from each area of my life. He took all my life. And instead of him being a piece of a pie that I was trying to like wedge in somewhere, which is what I thought I could do, like just wedge him in here really quick. He was the entire pie. Entire pie. And nobody warned me about that. And so what I kept saying, and I was in this parenting group, when he was about 3 months old, we joined this parenting group that was phenomenal. And so for 12 weeks, we met with these families every Tuesday night. We all had babies the same age. and which was so comforting to realize that, like, we were all having a really hard time. And that was fantastic.
I'm not alone.
We're not alone, because I'd felt very alone prior to that.
Yeah.
But what I kept saying is, like, every week we would do this little check-in, and I would say, I'm just waiting for things to go back to normal. And at the end of the 12 weeks, I was like, oh my God, I've said the same thing like for 12 weeks straight. And what if they don't go back to normal? And then he was a year, and I was like, he's 1 now, and I'm still waiting for things to go back to normal. And that was that identity shift where I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not going back to the old me. And what does that mean moving forward?
Yes.
And that was really overwhelming, because I didn't know what it meant, and I didn't know who I wanted to be. I just knew that I had lost my sense of self. And a little after he turned 1, he was probably closer to 18 months. My husband and I went on a date night and we were like at Target or something super romantic. And
that is the early definition of a date night.
Oh, 100%. And like, we were really excited to be at Target, by the way.
The first day, both my kids were in preschool together, like at the same time. I had 2.5 hours.
Oh.
I spent all 2.5 hours at Target. I'm like slowly wandering the aisles thinking this is bliss.
Oh, it's like Disneyland.
Being like, wow, I can like just look at these things. And I'm like, I need a tennis racket. And I bought a tennis racket, and I don't even play tennis.
Right.
But like, I could.
You're like, the new me is going to play tennis now that I have 2.5 hours to myself.
I still think it's sitting in my garage 15 years later, untouched. But yes, you know, that date night at Target is a real thing for new moms.
For sure. For sure. And we had this moment as we were like just randomly, passively, like looking through aisles or whatever, where we had this like banter of sarcasm and joking around. And I remember laughing, like really genuine laughing. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, like that's the old me. And my first thought was like, my poor husband has not seen this version of me in a 1.5 years. And then my next thought was of guilt and shame. Like,
sure,
just a nightmare to be around. And then my next thought was like, oh my gosh, she's coming back. Like, finally, she's coming back.
There she is.
And that was like me realizing, like, I didn't even fully recognize how far gone she was. And so that recognition of like, I don't get to go back. And then I laughed for the first time in a 1.5 years and recognizing that it had been that long was like, oh my gosh, what does this look like moving forward? And who am I going to be? And it was definitely like, and nothing magical happened after that, where I was like, and now I'm the new me. And like, it was still another couple of years. And so that's really where the podcast began after my son was 3. And I was still just like starting to put pieces together, but I had enough of it behind me that I could look back and recognize like, wow, you really did not know where you were going during that time. And nobody warned you. Like, nobody warned you that there's this complete loss of self. And I was actually doing an interview with someone today that no one warns you about that grief. And no one acknowledges that that's what it is, that you're actually in a phase of grieving that nobody tells you about, that you can't identify.
Right. And then God forbid you express that to somebody else, then you might get shamed for not feeling fully blissful with this new baby and new life.
Right.
So that inability to authentically express what's really going on, even if you're able to identify that that's what's really going on.
Right.
Yeah. And I think you're right to name it as grief. And people assume grief is around death, but grief is around loss.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And around like the conflicting emotions as you're going through this major transition of like, I used to be here and now I'm going here and I don't know what that means. And there's a loss of that, what I used to be, but I don't know what, like, there's no clear sense of direction. It just felt like so much. And it took a long time to figure that out. And that was really like that was the beginning of the podcast, but it opened the door to so many fantastic conversations that I've been able to have over the years that have really created space for not just early motherhood, but like the evolution of women and the evolution of moms as leaders, and like how we own those pieces of ourselves as we evolve over our years of mothering.
Well, oh gosh, there's so much I want to respond to that. But what you just named before that last part you just said about how we as moms, evolve, everything you just named of will it ever go back to normal? I don't know who I'm supposed to be. I don't know. It's unpredictable. It's uncertain. I don't know how to do this. That's also exactly where everyone is so stuck with this COVID world that we're still living in.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
There is this, okay, it's never going to be the way it was.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea how it's going to land and like so in the meantime, what do I hold on to? What do I stay grounded around? How do I find my identity when a lot of the rug has been pulled out from underneath me and it's all an unknown?
Right.
And, that's where I love mindfulness as a tool of acceptance and presence of, well, can you let it be okay that you're not okay right now?
Right.
Can you let it be okay that this is hard and this is scary and this is overwhelming and also totally appropriate for what you're going through? It'd be weird if it weren't.
Yes. One of the things I've talked about quite a bit on my show during this, it's funny, one of the administrators of my son's school a couple months ago, it was at the end of last year. He said to me, he's like, yeah, so have you like talked about like moms and the pandemic at all on your podcast yet? This was like after we'd been in the pandemic for a year. I was like, that's all I've talked. Like, what else do you think I'd be talking about?
Yeah.
Like, that's like all we talk about ever. Like that's our whole life. And, but I think one of the things was, so I thought it was so funny, like, must be nice. Is it not consuming? I mean, I know it was totally consuming his life, but like, and as an administrator, it was so consuming, but it was just funny. Like, yeah,
we're talking about that.
Moms have noticed that we're in a pandemic, but, what's been so fascinating. And one of the things I've talked about a lot is in referencing what you said about naming things, naming the grief and trauma of this time. And I think that moms have not given themselves permission to identify. And I'm curious if you agree from a therapist standpoint, like to identify this season of life as trauma, for like what moms have had to go through in terms of what they've had to do to keep to have the constant stress of their children's, their family's health, whether that's their children, their parents, their partner, themselves, their children's schooling, which has been looked like a disaster for so many families, their employment, their like housing security for so many people, food security for so many people, like the many, many layers. And I think when we're in something and we're like, we're just having to figure out how to make decisions and pay bills and
in survival mode. Yeah.
Yeah. You can't recognize like, this is trauma. And let's own that so that we can recognize that, like, if we're really tired, we need to take a nap. Because
and exactly what I'm glad that you named it as that, because I define trauma really simply. It's anytime our nervous system is deregulated. Because when we think of trauma from a more traditional PTSD standpoint, it used to be, even in the DSM, which is, the book of diagnostic for therapists, it used to be defined as a life or death situation. And over the years, that definition has gotten, I would say, a little softer, more gentle, and more inclusive, because what the research actually shows is there's capital T trauma, which is, the life and death, and there's lowercase t traumas. Well, enough little t traumas add up to show in the brain the same effect as a capital T trauma, right? Yeah. So all these little things that feel like, oh, it's just part of what we're going through. There's that shame. I should be able to get through this. No, your nervous system is dysregulated.
Yeah. 100%.
You feel off. And whenever we're dysregulated, we're either like elevated above it with anxiety, or we're kind of below it in depression. And we're trying to seek back to get into that, what's called the window of tolerance, to say, like, how can I be back in a predictable zone of how things are supposed to be?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it is absolutely a traumatic event. And I can tell you this, since the past 18 months, not only has my client load more than doubled, which let me just say, being a therapist is a great profession in the middle of a pandemic. And I've been very busy because I've been overworked because I'm so authentically in service. And the massive uptick has been more recently than it did in the beginning. Because the longer it goes on, where there is no true sense of normalcy, right? I mean, we want to think it's normal. And yet you and I were both talking before we hit record about some of our experiences, whether it's traveling or conferences or live person events, like we're far from normal.
Right. Right.
And as long as we're in comparison to the way it was, we're never going to fully accept the way it is.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. We're far from normal, and we still don't have a sense of like, and I've used this analogy so many times. Initially during the pandemic, I was like, oh, it's like when you're running a marathon. And I kept saying, when we thought it was going to be like 6 weeks long, the pandemic,
right.
I was like, we're at the start line, like brace yourselves. And then I got to this point where I was like, this is not a marathon because we don't know when the end is. And in a marathon, like I have to make it to 26.2. You might not know how long it's going to take, but there's markers along the way.
And there's an end goal.
Yeah. Yeah. This is childbirth, except for that there's not a baby at that. But like the hardest part of childbirth for me was like not knowing how long it was going to last or how bad it was going to get or when it was going to be over, or like just having to be in it and not know anything more than that. Like not know if I'm going to be safe, not knowing if the baby's going to be okay, and just being in the worst pain of your life forever and ever and ever, it seemed like. And that was torture to me. And as someone who had run a marathon and done all this other athletic stuff and really thought I could handle it. And then I got in it and I was like, oh, this is totally different because of these unknown variables that I didn't realize I was signing up for until I was in it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're at now, where we're making a lot of accommodations and adapting, but yet there's so many things we don't know, and there's still no timeline. And the news headlines are not getting more optimistic. They might be getting more optimistic in terms of our ability to vaccinate, but like there's other layers of news headlines that are more dramatic by the day, unrelated to COVID. And so it just seems like the state of the world is just like,
it's heavy.
It's so much.
And I want to add, so right when the school year started of 2020, so we had been 6 months into the pandemic, I had started a year-long mindful parenting membership to help parents. Really, when everyone was being homeschooled, my thought was, if the parents are stressed, I'm not going to create an environment in which the kids can learn. So I can give the parents these tools. It'll trickle down to the kids being able to have an actual ability to learn other than being in a chaotic home, right? And what I found with so many of the parents, that some of their biggest stressors was grief over their kids' lost opportunities.
Yeah. Yep.
And the irony is the kids didn't know that it was a lost opportunity until the parents put their own history onto their kid. So we think like these kids are being traumatized, when in reality, they actually don't know any different.
They don't know what it's like to go to homecoming.
Right? I mean, like my kids are in high school, and I think it's a little bit silly because it feels a little entitled, but we had homecoming 3 weeks ago. And then this past weekend, they did junior prom for the current seniors because they didn't get to have a junior prom last year. So these kids, like 2 weekends apart, just to be able to say you had a junior prom, but you guys aren't juniors, you're seniors, and you're going to have your senior bowl in 6 months. Like, did we really need to do that? Like, who was that actually for? I actually think it was for the parents, not the kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a lot of irony in whose trauma is this. I'm not denying these kids have had lost opportunities, obviously, but the parents' own fears are adding so much to it. Yeah.
Our school had a similar conversation about like, end of the year trips for the middle school kids. And like, but they used to go to Washington, DC, and like, what should that be canceled? And if it could be reimagined, what would it look like? And there was a conversation around like, well, none of them have been to Washington, DC. Could they just like, could we do something here locally in Washington State? Like they're not going to know the difference. I mean, of course there's like the kind of the glamour
story about it.
Right. Of like getting on the plane and whatever, but like, they just want to like go do something together.
They want to have an experience.
Right.
So I want to ask you something. So, well, maybe not ask you some other shit, or kind of like bring in a different point. So you talked about this grief over your lost identity when becoming a mom. Mm-hmm. And I want to share, I'm at the other end of that spectrum.
Yeah, tell me. Because I'm not prepared. I'm not prepared for this.
I'm telling you this so you can just like start to begin to prepare, because like, here's the arc. here's like that, that curve.
Yeah.
My oldest daughter is turning 18 next month. And I am like, what the actual fuck?
Yeah.
First of all, how am I old enough to have an 18-year-old is mind-boggling. we've done our first college tour. Her number one choice is to go to Wisconsin. We're doing another college tour in Massachusetts in a couple of weeks. She's applying nowhere in California. So no matter what, my baby's going to be far away. And when I was pregnant, the one thing I kept crying about was one day she's going to go to college.
Yeah.
And so this identity shift again, as, we kind of enter into motherhood identity change. And now, like, what does that look like as a mom of an adult?
Yeah.
It is just a whole mess of emotions. And I go from like sobbing to laughter to joy to grief to like amazement to intense sadness. And I'm like, my kids are like laughing at me because she mentioned something about her birthday and I just burst into tears.
Yeah.
It's grief.
100%. That makes so much sense.
And you're at the middle mark. And I remember when my daughter was 9 and the play group that we had been in since 8 weeks old, all of the moms are like, we're halfway there. And now I'm here and you're at that halfway point.
Yeah.
And let me just tell you, Sarah, it's a cliche to say it's a blink of an eye, but I'm getting emotional even as I say that to you, because literally a blink of an eye.
Isn't it funny, the perception on time? I actually the other day made this commitment to, not the other day, recently, or a few months ago, made the commitment to co-chair something at my son's school for 2 years. And at first I was like 2 years. And then I was like, it's only 2 years. Like, and pre-kid, like 2 years was like a lifetime. And then with a kid, you're like, it's only 2 years. I mean, that goes so fast. Yes. But I mean, you're absolutely right about that shift, and that, I mean, motherhood screws with your mind in so many ways. And especially as it relates to time, because there's so much of it early on where you're like, can the time just go faster? But what is that great phrase? Like the days are long, but the year is short. Yeah. I remember reading something when my son, I want to say he was 4, and it was talking about children gaining independence. Maybe it was when he was 6. I'm trying to remember what the age was. They were saying the point of the article was that children start really pushing for more independence. I think it might've been at age 8. They start there, and it's just like subtle at first, like just a little bit more, but it's like a very steady, like once it starts, they don't become more dependent again. They only become more independent. And so I think it was like starting at age 8 or something. Cause I remember just like shutting the article down and being angry and thinking, I'm halfway there. I'm halfway to this point where he's not going to need me anymore. And for us by age 4, we had like, the first year was really hard, but like 2 to 5 was this magical sweet spot, which I know it wasn't for a lot of people, but that was this very magical time. So when he was to learn at age 4 that like I was halfway done with the good stuff, and I was so mad. And I think that I had thought like that the separation began at 18. And I did not realize that like it starts at 8 and it's 10 years of separating. And I'm starting to see a little bit of that now. And I mean, but I'm like clinging to anything I can get. For a while, I was jokingly using the hashtag creating codependent kids. I was like, how do I convince him? He was like, Mom, can you be my roommate in college? I was like, yes, I can. Mom, can you move into my house when I get married? Yeah. Yes, I can. Yeah, Mom, will you sing to my babies every night? Yes, I will.
The struggle is real. The struggle is real. And, to be able to witness your children emerging as humans outside of your guidance it's a beautiful thing. And, I'm Jewish and my daughters both have been bat mitzvahed. And I really wish across the world, there literally was a ritual for that age outside of Jewish kids at 13, because there was a beautiful shift that I had to adopt in taking a step back as what was supposed to emerge as this transition for them into maturity and independence and their own voice and their own actions. Yeah. And it is hard, but it's also prepared me like with these college applications. Like I've already had practice in taking a step back and not micromanaging and recognizing this isn't my journey. Yeah. I'm here to guide and support and to be a part of. And like, wow, like I don't own that. I don't own her. I just get to bear witness and be guide and hold space
Mhm.
and then like have my heart broken a million times as she
Right.
plans to leave.
Right. Oh my gosh. I mean, I do think about that a lot. It's interesting. Like, I do think about what my journey will look like. And I am really conscientious about, I think this is part of my like drive to build something is so that like when he's gone, I will have something to do. Like
Yes.
I'm really conscientious about like my identity is not 100% motherhood. It's also not 100% in my marriage. Like it's,
Yes.
I really maintain a sense of identity outside of both of those things, even though those two things are so crucially important in my life. And I think some of that is like a layer of protection for like, okay, like if something happens to my husband or when my child is done with me, not if he moves on, but when he moves on.
And him moving on means you did a good job. It's not like a punishment.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I love that you said that because it's something not many women either acknowledge that they need to be able to have something to hold on to. And I talk to women about this all the time. In fact, a lot of the times with my clients who have kids in middle school age, I will plant the seed around end of high school is going to be here before you know it. Have you started considering, especially for stay-at-home moms, who you are outside of this role as mom?
Yeah.
But even still, many women don't have the ability or the know-how or even the desire to find independence outside their roles. And I think that's a huge thing because again, we go back to the shame. They may have shame for it, or they simply don't understand why it's important.
Right.
Or they just physically don't know how to do it. So how have you been able to maintain that?
Oh my gosh. Well, I early on, when I first started the show, one of my very first coaching clients. So I shifted out of like health and wellness specific coaching into more life coaching. And now that's like life coaching and business and leadership coaching. And one of my very first life coaching clients came to me and she said, my sons are 20 and 22, and they're both, one of them had moved out like 6 months before, and the other one was going to be moving out shortly. Or maybe he had just moved out. But anyway, so she's like at home for the first time without children in 22 years. And she said, I don't know what to make for dinner because I don't know what food I like. I've never made food based on in 22 years, I have not made any meals based on what I like. And it was this like overwhelming experience for her to identify that like, I don't know what food I like. And
I don't know what I like.
She was telling me this. And I mean, that was like such an impactful moment for me. I thought, well, I could see myself being that and not to like place codependence on her, but I could see myself being that codependent, like just being so invested in this child that I don't want to lose or have like, making them the center of everything to the point that I don't know what I like. And so I was like, okay, like you need to make sure that you know some things that you like outside.
Isn't that great when we learn from our clients?
Yeah, it was and I mean, Vinny would have been really young. He was probably 3.5 or 4 at the time. And that has just, I've used that example and shared that story so many times because it was so glaring. And I think that when we're in the phase that I'm in with, at that time he was 3 or 4 and now he's 9. And I'm like, how would I not know what I like? Like seems ridiculous. But then like, there's so many things that you do in service of other people for so many years that you don't even recognize you're doing them and that come at a cost to you that you don't recognize the cost until later. So I'm sure there's other things I'm doing that I don't know. But yeah, so I think that like, that was really glaring to me to like, okay, you need to make sure that you maintain the sense of self and sense of like who you are, what you need, what you want, what you desire, beyond just mothering.
Yeah. See, and I had the complete inverse of that experience. I had started dating my ex-husband when I was 13 years old. We met at 13, started dating at 14, and was together for 23 years. And I had this wake-up call in my early 30s being like, I don't know who I am outside of wife and mother. Like I had zero sense of identity. And I've been divorced now for about 7 years, and I've had to find it and uncover it and create it, not really discover, but create it. Right.
Yeah.
And there's been so much shame that I did feel in the beginning around creating my sense of self because I feared I would be resented for taking any time away from my daughters.
Yeah.
And I had to have the trust that, no, I'm actually role modeling something really important to them. I'm role modeling the value of a sense of self, the value of growth and curiosity, and not doing the status quo just because it's what you've always done and it's safe and comfortable, but to get out of your comfort zone. And I remember when I would go on retreats, like it was gut-wrenchingly painful and I felt so guilty leaving, but I knew I needed to do it for me.
Totally.
And my youngest daughter and I used to have this journal where it was like, write about mom, write about daughter. Like we would ask each other questions. And I think she was around 8 at the time and maybe a little bit older. And the question said, describe your mom in one word. And my daughter said adventurous. And
Ooh.
I just like burst into tears because I thought, I need to let go of that shame because that's not what she's taking. Like she's actually seeing the other side of it, which is courage, which is exploration, which is growth. And now this is a daughter who wants to go abroad for a semester in high school next semester. And who am I to stop her, right?
Yeah.
Like she's going to be across the world. We've already been across the world with each other because of her desires. And so it's like, I just want to give that message to the moms out there too.
Yeah.
Like you think it's shame, but like, what's the flip side of what you're role modeling?
Totally. It's funny. I'm thinking like, what would my child say? He'd probably be like, nice.
Hey,
I'd be like,
really
I'm jealous of Jory's adventure.
It was a lot of work to get there on my part, but you've got time.
Yes. Yeah. It is interesting to see. I actually had, the opportunity to do a TV appearance a couple months ago. And now like, anytime I do any sort of like interview or go on a trip or whatever, my son's like, are you going on TV this time? And I'm like, I love that that stood out to him. And now he's like, that's the thing my mom does. Sometimes she goes on TV.
It's a sense of pride, right?
Yes. And like anything that allows him to see that like, these are things that moms do. I mean, it doesn't have to be going on TV, but in terms of like building a business or being a leader or like, having a podcast or whatever the thing is that like allows him to position me in a position of impact in the world and influence in the world, I think is so important.
It's huge.
Yeah.
Well, and it also sets him up for his future relationships to value, assuming heteronormative, right? To assume right, that one day his wife, he will value her having an identity because he witnessed you having an identity.
Right. Yeah.
And again, that's one of the counterpoints to moms who feel the shame of doing anything on their own. It's like, okay, well, and what are you role modeling?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because,
my mother-in-law made my husband, before she went and worked 2 jobs every single day, she made him like pancakes and eggs and bacon every single morning. And then she would leave and work from like 7 a.m. until like 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And she did not do me any favors.
No.
Like, I will never make you breakfast. Like maybe on a Sunday, maybe once or twice a year. Like I might make you some eggs.
Yeah.
But like in no world am I ever making bacon on a Wednesday for anyone.
That's too well, and that's also generational, right?
Totally.
That's kind of that whole martyrdom.
Yeah.
And then, she probably had to walk to school in the snow too. That she had.
And she was a single mom. I'm like, how did you do this? And why?
And why? Yeah.
And I'm sure it was like her moment to connect and her opportunity to like show up and, and when she had limited ability to show up because she had to work 2 jobs.
It's what she could do.
So, I mean, I totally, I adore her for doing that. And I'm so impressed that she did that, but.
And you're like, hell to the no.
I'm like, no way. You can get yourself an English muffin.
Yeah. There's some peanut butter in the cupboard.
Right.
I literally could talk to you for hours. I can't wait next time when I come to Seattle and we're just going to go to dinner and just have the best night. I've so valued already our connection. And I really value the work that you're doing. I aspire to have a podcast over years that continue to make impact. But most importantly, I love having the platform for these conversations and these connections. And what would you say to women who are listening, who are like, Sara, that all sounds great. Where do I start? I mean, just kind of give one takeaway of what someone could who feels the shame around, I'm not like her, I can't do that, or perception of, I don't know how to do that. What would you say of how you might work with one of your coaching clients of just a starting point that feels tangible?
So a starting point, I think, would be to look at other women who have done what you want to do and watch how they do it and listen to how they do it. And so I know this is how I have built, I'm working now, this is the third business that I've built, but it's always been, whether it's building a business or building a lifestyle it's always like from watching how someone else did it. Like, and when I say watch, I mean like stock, like really invest in learning from people who are doing the things that you want to do and finding out how they're doing them. And so like one of the things that I do that really sets me up to be, and this is a whole nother topic, so I'll keep this super brief, but I manage anxiety every single day. And so when I get up in the morning, one of the first thing I do is I get up by myself before my family wakes up. I spend some time by myself, figuring out what I'm doing for the day, have a cup of coffee by myself. I do a workout by myself. Those are like my non-negotiables. So when people ask me like, well, what's your key to success? Or how do you make space for all these things? Or how do you get inspired to build new businesses or whatever? And it really does come back to, I take time to myself every single morning. And that's been one of my huge keys. And so I can say that people who now are looking at like, what is my journey and what has that been? That's one of the things that I've done. And I've learned that from watching other people who've been really successful go before me and noting that like, oh, that's how they do it. And that worked for them. I'm going to try that and see if that works for me. And it's like implementing like a habit here or a habit there from someone else and seeing how that impacts me. So
I think what you're saying is don't try to reinvent the wheel too, right?
No, like see what works for other people. And sometimes people stuff is not going to work for you. Like the Miracle Morning hour-long process of meditating and journaling and visualizing. Like I can't do all that. I don't want to spend an hour, but I can take like 15 minutes or 10 minutes and do something that can help me set my day on the right course. And so, figuring out like how you can make things work for you given the constraints of your life.
And I just want to add to that, so much of what I talk about with clients is around balance and setting yourself up with realistic expectations, right? And to me, it's always about start small, right? If we expect these huge changes at once, all we're going to end up with is more shame around, see, I can't even do that, right? Yeah. So just to pick the one thing and start there and build success around the one thing. And then when that feels manageable, then add one more. I mean, I know so many women out there are wanting to create so much change, and the overwhelm of change just paralyzes them.
Totally.
And that's, where I see most people getting stuck is they want too much change to happen all at once.
Yeah. A change is like showing up every single day and doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, which is like how I became an athlete. It's how I built a gym. It's how I built a podcast. It's how I've built it's how I got pregnant after years of infertility. It's like showing up every single day. It's never cute. It's never pretty, but the end result can be cute and pretty.
Absolutely. Sara, I adore you. I love the work that you are doing. So fun. How can people find you? I know we'll have all the links in the show notes, but what's the best ways for people to find you?
Yeah. So the Shameless Mom Academy podcast can be found on any podcast platform. So Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to shows. And then I also have a Facebook group for moms. If you go to shamelessmom.com/Facebook. And then online, if you want to connect with me through my website, I'm at shamelessmom.com.
I love it. We'll have those links in the show notes. And
I'll give you my
thanks
Instagram.
Again.
Can I give my Instagram?
Please.
As an afterthought, but I do spend a lot of time on Instagram. I'm at Shameless Mom Academy.
Perfect. And I will make sure that I think we're connected everywhere, but I'll make sure so when the show comes out, we can share all of the wisdom you've given us today. And again, thank you so much for your time today. And I look forward to staying connected. And thanks again so much for
and having you on the show.
Yes, I can't wait. And for just all the work that you're doing, I think to be able to have leaders in the community to show that we can be shameless unapologetically is a real gift to women everywhere. So
absolutely.
All right, everyone, take care and be well.
To continue your journey forward, find Jory Rose on Facebook and Instagram to become part of her growing community. You can also gain access to her meditations, books, online classes, or to sign up for an upcoming retreat. Visit her at joryrose.com. That's JOREE ROSE.com.